The metallic clang of lance against whip echoed through the dusty plaza like a freedom bell, and in that instant Aurora knew she had found not only her destiny, but the dawn of a new era for all who witnessed the impossible, a disarmed stranger defeating 5 armed thugs with nothing but courage and an ancient promise. But to understand how we arrive at this epic moment, we need to go back 3 days, when Aurora was still a wandering shadow on the dusty roads cutting through the forgotten desert. Her worn boots marked the monotonous rhythm of a walk without apparent destination, while she carried on her back a battered leather bag holding the last vestiges of a life she preferred to forget. The relentless sun beat down on her tanned skin as she followed the road leading to the town of Dry Rock, a name that didn't lie. There, even tears dried before touching the ground. Aurora wasn't specifically seeking that place. In fact, she had fled from so many others that any direction seemed valid, as long as it took her away from the memories that haunted her like ghosts at twilight. 3 years had passed since she witnessed the lynching of her brother Miguel in that same town. He was just a 16-year-old boy who dared to question why the wealthy landowners could waste water while children died of thirst. The furious mob wouldn't listen to reason, and Aurora, then a girl of only 14, watched helplessly as they dragged her brother by the hair to the central plaza. "Never again," she had whispered over Miguel's makeshift grave 3 days later. "Never again will I stand by silently while the powerful crush the defenseless." It was a promise made by a grieving child, but it had grown within her like a stubborn seed in arid soil. Over the following years, Aurora wandered from town to town, always fleeing memories, always carrying the guilt of her own cowardice in her chest. She had become a solitary wanderer, supporting herself with sporadic work, a cook in taverns, a helper in markets, sometimes a guide for merchants crossing the desert. But there was something different about this trip back to Dry Rock. In the battered bag, among her few possessions, Aurora carried 3 objects she had inherited from her maternal grandmother: an ancient reinforced leather helmet, a circular shield marked by time, and a wooden lance that, according to family stories, belonged to a lineage of protectors, warriors who swore to defend the oppressed long before any king or law. "Your great-grandmother was a guardian of the ancient lance," her grandmother used to tell her on stormy nights. "She protected travelers from bandits, defended children from wolves, and never, ever allowed cruelty to prevail before her eyes." Aurora had grown up believing these were just bedtime stories, legends of a family trying to feel important. But now, at 19, carrying the weight of 3 years of guilt and regret, she was beginning to wonder if those relics weren't a call she had been ignoring for too long. The first sign that something was wrong came even before she sighted the low walls of Dry Rock. A sharp, desperate neigh cut through the hot afternoon air, followed by human screams and the unmistakable crack of whips. Aurora quickened her pace, climbing a small rocky rise that gave her a view of the town's central plaza. What she saw made her blood run cold. In the center of the plaza, surrounded by 5 men armed with whips and chains, a magnificent golden stallion struggled to stay on its feet. Its hind legs were bleeding, its mane was tangled with dust and sweat, but its eyes, large, dark, and intelligent, still shone with a dignity that its tormentors couldn't break. "This damned animal hurt the colonel's son," yelled the leader of the thugs, a stocky man with a sparse beard and small eyes. "We're going to teach him what happens when you rebel against your masters." Aurora ran down the slope, but stopped abruptly at the entrance to the plaza. There were the same faces she had seen 3 years before, some of the men who had participated in Miguel's lynching. The same cowardly crowd that had watched silently as injustice was consumed, and that now witnessed a new cruelty with the same deadly indifference. Children huddled behind the market stalls. Women wiped away tears that stubbornly flowed down faces weathered by the sun and the harshness of life. Men averted their gaze in a mixture of fear and indifference. It was as if time had stopped, as if nothing had changed since that terrible day when she lost her brother. But something had changed. Aurora was no longer that frightened 14-year-old girl. She had grown, she had suffered, she had carried the weight of guilt and regret for 3 long years. And now, faced with a new injustice, she felt something different pulsing in her chest. No longer fear, but a determination that seemed to come from some deep ancestral place. Her hands trembled as she opened the bag and touched the leather helmet. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. "The lance chooses its bearer, my girl. It's not the bearer who chooses the lance." The stallion whinnied in pain, but maintained its proud bearing. There was something about that animal that touched her deeply. The same dignity that Miguel had maintained until the end, the same refusal to bow before cruelty. And it was then that Aurora understood. It wasn't the horse that was being tested there. It was her. The leader of the thugs raised his whip for a blow that would surely be fatal, aiming for the animal's neck. The crowd held its breath. And it was at that moment that Aurora stepped forward, still trembling, but with a firm voice. "Stop." The word escaped her lips more forcefully than she intended, echoing through the silent town square. The thug turned, surprised, and the crowd murmured uneasily. Aurora took another step, and another, until she stood in the very center of the square, between the thugs and their victim. "Who are you to interrupt the rightful punishment of this 4-legged vermin?" snarled the leader, but there was something in his voice that didn't sound as confident as before. Aurora didn't answer immediately. Instead, she opened her bag and, with deliberate movements, took out the helmet and placed it on her head. The aged leather fit perfectly, as if it had been made especially for her. Then she picked up the circular shield, feeling its familiar weight in her arms. Finally, she raised the wooden spear, and for a moment, everyone could see how it seemed to gleam in the relentless sun. "My name is Aurora," she said, her voice now carrying an authority that surprised even herself. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some of the older ones remembered the stories, the legends of the ancient protectors who defended the innocent. But legends were one thing. A 19-year-old girl facing 5 armed men was something else entirely. The leader of the thugs laughed, but the sound was forced, nervous. "Guardian? You're just a girl playing at being a heroine. Get out of the way before you get hurt." "No," Aurora replied, and this time her voice didn't tremble in the slightest. "You will stop now. This animal does not deserve this suffering." "This animal," spat the thug, "brought down Colonel Mendoza's son, nearly broke the boy's leg. It deserves to die." "And what was the boy doing?" Aurora asked, taking another step forward. "Betting on whipping the horse, spurring it relentlessly, treating it like an object?" The silence that followed was telling. Some of the onlookers lowered their eyes, ashamed. They knew Aurora was right. The colonel's son was known for his cruelty to animals, but no one dared to confront him. "It doesn't matter what the boy was doing," said the leader, but his voice lacked conviction. "Orders are orders." "Orders," Aurora repeated, and for the first time she smiled, a sad smile, heavy with memories. 3 years ago, you used the same excuse when you killed my brother. Orders are orders. But I've learned something since then. There are times when obeying orders is the greatest cowardice of all." Recognition flickered across the faces of some of the thugs. They remembered the girl who had witnessed the lynching, the girl who cried while they dragged her brother away. But this woman before them was no longer that frightened child. "You're the communist's sister," said the leader, and now there was something dangerous in his voice. "You should have learned to keep quiet." "I've learned many things," Aurora replied, raising her spear. "I've learned that silence in the face of injustice is complicity. I've learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. And I've learned that some promises are more important than life itself." The stallion, as if understanding that someone had finally come to its rescue, managed to rise shakily to its feet. Its hind legs trembled, but it stood, its eyes fixed on Aurora with an expression that seemed almost human, gratitude mixed with hope. "Last chance," said the leader, raising his whip. "Step aside or you'll join the animal." Aurora closed her eyes for a moment, and for an instant everyone thought she had lost her nerve. But when she opened them again, there was something different in them, a light that wasn't there before, a determination that seemed to come from far beyond herself. "No," she said, assuming a fighting stance with her spear. "This time I will not step aside." What happened next was almost unbelievable. When the first thug lunged with his whip, Aurora moved with a grace that surprised everyone, including herself. The wooden spear blocked the blow, and the sound of the impact echoed through the square like a cry of freedom. The second man attacked from the side, but Aurora spun her shield, deflecting the whip and counterattacking with the spear point, hitting the attacker's wrist and making him drop his weapon. The third and fourth came together, but Aurora had found her rhythm. Each movement flowed naturally into the next, as if she were dancing a dance she had known forever. There was no bloodshed, no serious injuries. Aurora simply disarmed the men one by one, using the spear to disarm, the shield to protect, and when necessary, her own agility to avoid blows. It was as if she had discovered a talent that had been dormant within her, waiting only for the right moment to awaken. The leader was the last to fall. When his curved sword flew through the air, disarmed by a precise blow from the spear, he fell to his knees in the dust, breathing heavily. He looked at Aurora with a mixture of anger and something that might have been respect. "This isn't over," he muttered, but his voice lacked strength. Aurora knelt beside him, and her voice was surprisingly gentle. "It doesn't have to be. You can choose to be different. You can choose to protect instead of destroy, to help instead of hurt." The man looked into her eyes, and for a moment everyone could see something break within him. Not his physical strength, but something deeper. The certainty that he was right, perhaps. The belief that cruelty was inevitable. "Why didn't you kill me?" he asked, genuinely confused. "I would have killed you." "Because," Aurora said, extending her hand to help him up, "someone needs to break the cycle. Someone needs to choose compassion over revenge." The man stared at the outstretched hand for a long moment, and then, to everyone's surprise, including his own, he took it. Aurora helped him to his feet, and they stood face to face in the dusty town square. "My name is John," he said, and his voice was different, softer, more human. I remember your brother. He was just a boy." "He was," Aurora confirmed, and there was no bitterness in her voice. "But he won't have died in vain if his death teaches us all that there's a better way to live." John nodded slowly, and then did something no one expected. He knelt before Aurora, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. "I'm sorry," he said, "for your brother, for everything." One by one the other thugs approached. Some remained resistant, others clearly shaken by what they had witnessed. Aurora didn't judge them, didn't threaten them. Instead, she did something that forever changed that moment. She offered each of them her hand. "We can all start over," she said. "We can all choose to be better than we were yesterday." Meanwhile, the stallion had slowly approached. His wounds weren't severe, more a product of humiliation than true brutality, but he still trembled from pain and exhaustion. Aurora turned to him, and her voice became even softer. "It's all right now," she whispered, gently touching the animal's muzzle. "No one will hurt you again." The horse lowered his head, resting it on Aurora's shoulder, and she could feel the relief trembling through his muscles. It was a moment of pure connection, of mutual understanding between two creatures who had found in each other the salvation they sought. "What are you going to name him?" a voice asked from behind her. It was a child, a girl of perhaps 8,
who had slipped from her mother's hand and approached with the natural curiosity. Aurora smiled, the first genuine smile she'd offered since arriving in the town. "Chieftain," she said. "I'll call him Chieftain." "Why?" the girl asked. "Because he's a leader," Aurora replied, stroking the animal's tangled mane. "He taught me that sometimes you have to suffer so that others can learn the importance of compassion." The crowd had gradually drawn closer, now forming a circle around Aurora and Chieftain. The faces that had once shown fear and indifference now displayed something different: admiration, hope, and perhaps most importantly, the recognition that change was possible.
"She really is the guardian of the ancient spear," an old man murmured, his voice filled with reverence. "My grandmother used to tell stories about them, warriors who protected the innocent, who chose compassion over vengeance. But the stories said they had vanished," a woman said. "They didn't vanish," Aurora replied, raising the spear. "They were just waiting for the right moment to return, waiting for someone to choose to be better." John, who had remained silent since his surrender, stepped forward. "And now?" he asked. "What will happen to us?" Aurora looked into his eyes, and he could see that there was no judgment there, only a wisdom that seemed beyond her years. "Now," she said, "you go back to your families. You look at your children and ask yourselves what kind of world you want to leave for them. You choose, each day, to be better people than you were yesterday." "What if we choose wrong again?" another of the former thugs asked. "Then you make the right choice the next day," Aurora replied. "Redemption isn't a destination, it's a journey, and it's a journey that never ends." The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in golden and orange hues that perfectly matched Chieftain's coat. Aurora knew it was time to leave, not because she was running away, but because there were other places that needed a guardian, other innocents who needed protection. But before mounting Chieftain, she did one last thing. She approached the center of the square, where a small plaque marked the spot where a community well had been built years before. She knelt there and placed her hand on the dry earth. "Miguel," she whispered, and her voice carried a peace she hadn't felt in 3 years. "I kept my promise. I didn't stand idly by. And I promise I'll never stand idly by again." When she rose, there were tears in her eyes, but they were tears of relief, not sadness. She had finally found her path, her true calling. She mounted Chieftain, and the animal, despite his wounds, rose with pride. They were an unlikely pair. A 19-year-old woman who had discovered her inner strength, and a stallion who had learned that not every battle needs to be won with violence. "Where are you going?" asked the girl who had approached earlier. Aurora smiled, and her voice carried a promise that would echo far beyond that moment. "Wherever I'm needed, wherever there's injustice, wherever there's needless suffering, wherever someone needs protection." "What if you can't?" the girl asked, with the brutal honesty of children. "Then at least I tried," Aurora replied, "and sometimes trying is enough to inspire others to try too." As they rode away from the square, the first drops of rain began to fall, a miracle in the forgotten desert. The water soaked into the dust, settling it and bringing the first scent of life that the land had felt in months. John ran after them, catching up as they left the town. "Wait," he called out, breathless. I want to apologize again, for your brother, for everything." Aurora stopped Chieftain and turned to him. "John," she said, and her voice was gentle, "guilt is a prison we build for ourselves. You can free yourself from it at any moment, simply by choosing to be better." "How?" he asked, and there was a vulnerability in his voice that touched Aurora deeply. "Start small," she replied. "Help a child who's fallen. Give water to a thirsty traveler. Defend someone who can't defend themselves. Redemption doesn't come from grand gestures, but from small daily choices. John nodded, and Aurora could see he truly understood. When they finally left, she knew she had left behind not just a peaceful village, but a transformed man. As they rode along the road towards the horizon, Aurora felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Not the naive hope that the world would change overnight, but the mature hope that every small act of kindness, every courageous choice, every moment of compassion contributed to a better future. Chieftain cantered with renewed vigor, his wounds already beginning to heal. And Aurora, for the first time in 3 years, wasn't running from her past. She was running towards her future. The stories would spread, as stories always do. They would tell of the mysterious stranger who faced down 5 armed men with only a wooden spear and a heart full of compassion. They would tell of the golden stallion who refused to bow to cruelty. They would tell of the guardian of the ancient spear, who had returned to remind the world that true strength doesn't come from the power to destroy, but from the courage to protect. And if you are hearing this story, if it has touched your heart in some way, then perhaps you too carry within you a little of that ancient light. Perhaps you too are called to make small, courageous choices, to reach out to those in need, to choose compassion over indifference. Because the truth is, we can all be guardians. We don't need ancient spears or magic shields. We just need the courage to act when injustice presents itself before us. As Aurora and Chieftain disappeared over the horizon, leaving behind a transformed village and hearts touched by hope, a new legend began to be born. But unlike ancient legends, this one wasn't about impossible heroes or supernatural powers. It was about something far more powerful and far more real: the infinite capacity of the human heart to choose love over hate, compassion over revenge, hope over despair. And that, perhaps, is the greatest magic of all: the magic of discovering that we all have the power to be the change we want to see in the world. We just need the courage to take that first step, as Aurora did in that dusty town square where a simple act of kindness changed everything. The metallic echo of the spear striking the whip still resonates in that village 3 years later, and it will continue to resonate whenever someone decides it's time to stop silently watching injustice. Because that is the true lesson of the guardian of the ancient spear. Not that we must be perfect heroes, but that we must have the courage to be compassionate humans. And so, as the sun set over the forgotten desert, a new era began. Not an era of sudden grand changes, but of small daily transformations, person by person, heart by heart, courageous choice by courageous choice. An era where everyone could be a guardian, as long as they had the courage to raise their own spear, the spear of compassion, justice, and unconditional love for humanity. Aurora and Chieftain continued their journey, knowing that wherever they went, they would carry with them not just a victory, but the certainty that the world still held hope. And that hope, passed from heart to heart, from story to story, would continue to shine like a spear of light in the dark, guiding all those who dared to dream of a better world.